Yo, what is up, you guys? It's K8 here, and today we're going to make a sort of distorted horn, so it sounds like this. And basically, what I'm going to show you is kind of what I did to achieve that sort of sound, and keep in mind if you change the filter types and lessen the distortion, you can get a very nice, clean, not so distorted horn like this one. So for example, the one I made under it, if I bring this up an octave, sounds like this. So play around with the distortion and the filters and you can get all sorts of different horn type sounds. So anyways, let's get started. I'll show you what I did here and explain some of the stuff I did as we go along. So be sure to initialize your preset first off. And I'm going to take you through this in the order in which I made this. So first thing I do is turn on mono legato, and I set this to slide. And so that's just because the way I like to play MIDI and I like to write melodies for this kind of stuff, I like the MIDI to have the legato feel. So another thing to do there is to bring up that portamento up 4.4.14. So, you know, it's not too much and it's still got a nice little effect to the MIDI. So next thing I do is also bring up the range here so I can have a full octave of pitch bend. So that just really helps with automation and all those things. So those are the things I like to set up first. We don't have to worry about polyphony because we have mono on. So we're only going to be playing one note at a time, kind of like one finger melody type stuff. So now we can sort of get into the next thing I did, which is EQ. So I know it's strange to set up your EQs when you probably only have one oscillator playing, but that's just something I like to do. I like to do some of the effects first with just the basic default oscillator and then start figuring out my oscillator combination. So it's kind of like a working backwards. So I can't show you the EQ here because I added this new skin to Sylenth, so I'll throw up a picture of it on my Mac. So my Mac, this skin worked fine, but here on PC, this one's a little glitched up. But yeah, I'll let you see what I'm doing there. I'll move on. I'll quickly just say I do that. I do this type of EQing because I like to really bring out the mids, and the EQ also makes the sound a lot less flat. If you kind of play around with turning the EQ on and off, you can notice how it sounds flat with it, flat without it, and then very nice and boosted with it. So obviously if I play something like this and then turn it on, it sounds like it's even a bit like it's in a box without the EQ. And then with it, much better. So that's the next thing I did. And now let's move on to reverb. So I like to do my reverb settings a little bit different, something that I think fits Sylenth a little bit better. I think Sylenth, the default settings of reverb are just ridiculous. So I like to pull down that size. So around 4.6 is what I have here. Pre-delay around 34 milliseconds, no damp, and width all the way up, and then pull down the dry wet to 15%. But my usual settings would usually be half the size of this. So usually I would pull this down to like 2 and then have a very high amount of dry wet. But in this case, I just kind of went the other way with it. So I usually don't like the size when it's up to like 7.5 and all that. So right around there in this ballpark, doesn't have to be too specific. Then the next thing I did was turn on the compressor, pull down the threshold to negative 12 dB. The attack should be a little bit lower, around 2 milliseconds. Release and ratio, I think, are where they are by default. So I set up my EQ, my reverb, and compression real fast, and then I started messing around with the oscillators. But we're going to go ahead and finish the effects because of the way I decided to do this. So distortion, we're going to add hard clip or just clip, and we're going to set that to 2.95. And you can see where the dry wet is all the way up. And a little bit of chorus just to top it. So just to make the pitch variation that gives us that width. So just that little extra width, even though it's subtle here. So we're going to set delay to 8.8 milliseconds. We're going to pull down depth to 40%. and we're going to put the dry wet at 20%. And it should help with a little bit of feedback. I don't know how that ended up down. So now that we've covered all the effects, let's actually get to these oscillators. So oscillator 1 here is just a sine wave, and you can see that we are using 8 voices and retrig and nothing else. So I just pull this down an octave. I just didn't do much here. 8 voices just to beef it up, and that's all the explanation I need to give there. So let's move on to the amp envelope for part A. So all I did was bring the release to 2.18 just to kind of mimic kind of what a horn decay sounds like. So it just kind of, it doesn't exactly just abruptly end like a synth would. This it kind of needs to sound like it's real, so it needs to kind of tail out a bit. So that's why I add a little bit of release there. Oscillator 2 is a Q pulse. So this for some reason combines really well with the sine wave and gives us a lot of nice higher mid and high frequencies in the combinations with the sine wave. So I kind of like that, kind of sort of mimics a horn in some ways when you combine the two. So combine that with 3 voices and detune that by a lot to like 6.29. It's a good combination. So also note that the retrig is on both of these. So that's really important for the sound. Otherwise it's gonna not sound anything like what I have. And let's move on now to the filter A. So we're gonna set this cutoff to 578.9 hertz, reso to 2, and drive up all the way. So the drive is ridiculous because I'm obviously distorting this one setting a lot. So there's drive here, drive on the other filter, distortion, and warm drive is on. So there's a lot of things distorting this, and the EQ boost also really will help it distort. So that's my own choice. That's what I wanted to do for this preset. But if you don't prefer or don't like that much distortion, you can back it off in any one of those places. In the distortion, on the filters, or on warm drive, you could have that off. So anyways, it's important to note that this is a bandpass, and I like the bandpass for this kind of lead because I guess it really helps focus the sound into a specific frequency range. So that's why I like that. So also note that this is on the 12 dB slope, and let's move on. So cutoff here is at 146 on our main filter control. So this controls both our filters, and no reso, no key track, and the warm drive is on. So now let's move on to part B. So what you could do is copy filter A and copy oscillator 1 and also the amp envelope, and you can paste those into part B. And really quick, before we do that, don't forget to copy the distortion amount and the envelope on that. So the envelope decay is at 1.03. This is on distortion amount, and this the parameter amount for that is 5.81. So that's just something that's on the distortion. That's why this is pulled down a little bit, and it gets a little stronger as the note gets held out. So again, more distortion stuff. If you don't prefer it, you don't need to do it. So let's go part B. So now let's paste in some of those things. So paste, 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 paste. So now oscillator 1 in part B is, we're going to change this to a saw. We're going to leave this, we're going to set this to 3 voices, retrig will stay on, and we're going to bring up the detune to 6.29. So actually, if you wanted, you could have just copied the second oscillator in part A and then drag that over to part B, and then just change this to a saw. And I think everything else is the same. And let's go bring up the release here, because this release is actually brought up from part A's. So this is now going to be a much longer release at 4.01. And oscillator 2 now, let's just set a saw, 8 voices, and detune that to 4.57. So because we have more voices on this, we're not going to detune this one as much as the first oscillator. So that way we have quite different amounts of detuning happening on different voices, and it just blends together in a nice way. And an important thing to note here is we're going to turn off the retrig on the last oscillator, so we don't want it there. So let's finish up with the filter. So the filter is going to be another bandpass, 12 dB slope. We're going to pull down the drive, so we're going to not have that up all the way. So we're going to bring that to 8.71. Reso will be pulled down a little bit to 1.43. and cutoff is at 120.88 hertz. You have a lot of different possibilities on how to change this and still have a horn sound. And as well, like if you change the filter types, lessen the distortion, you can get something similar to what I showed you at the beginning. So something more like this. So hopefully you guys like this, and thanks for watching, and of course, Sylenth.